This is an instructional video to assist in the application process for Element 3 funding. The video is produced by the Virtual School SEND. Contact details will be available at the end of the video. These are the aims of the workshop and its content. This workshop has been devised following recommendations and feedback from Settings and Element 3 funding moderators. Element 3 funding is a part of high needs funding delegated to schools and is also known as top-up. The Department for Education annually produces operational guidance to explain all funding in schools. Element 3 is a part of that. The guidance recognises that most children and young people with high needs will have EHCPs, although this is not always the case. Here is a description of Elements 1, 2 and 3. The SEN Notional, or Element 2, is allocated to schools each financial year and, in Norfolk, contributes to the first £6,000 of a child or young person's provision. Other counties take into consideration Element 1 as well. This fund is not ring-fenced, so it is at the setting and trust leaders' discretion on how they allocate the funds in their schools. However, the local authority have a responsibility to ensure provision is appropriate and settings are required to be transparent about how they have spent SEN funding. Element 3 funding is funding for children and young people with high needs, that is, where their individual provision costs the setting more than £6,000 per year. There are three types of Element 3 funding in Norfolk. The first is for children and young people who have an EHC plan. The second is for those children and young people who have high needs but don't have an EHC plan and may not need one. The third is those children and young people whose circumstances are particularly exceptional and they need a very specific type of support. Historically, we have funded pupils through exceptional circumstances who have a tracheostomy, recovering from chemotherapy and an amputation, and living with a brain tumour. We have also funded some children who have been granted a place at a specialist facility, but are currently in mainstream school for another term. All exceptional circumstances requests are discussed on a case-by-case basis by moderators, taking into consideration pupil and setting contextual information. The following slides guide you through the application form for SEN Support Element 3 funding, available via Perspective Lite. Your settings head teacher or principal has a login for Perspective Lite. They can request that other members of staff have logins to access certain sections of the platform, for example, Element 3 funding. Please note, new forms are uploaded every term, so be sure that you're completing the correct terms form. Where a setting completes a previous terms form, this will be returned and a request will be made for the current form to be completed. When filling in Section A, please ensure all information given is in full and accurate to avoid any data breaches. We are handling very sensitive information about children and young people and settings and need to ensure we are following NCC data protection guidance. Department for Education numbers and URN are needed to cross-reference school information and for uploading feedback. We also need to know the name of the person completing the application and their contact details, should any follow-up be needed. No signature is required, However, it is assumed upon completion of the form that the head teacher or principal is aware this application is being made. Again, accuracy is important in Section B. Pupil identifiers are required for when approved applications are sent to the Education Finance team and for VS Send tracking. A setting must decide which funding band the child or young person's provision comes under. Bandings are currently 1 to 3, and the link on the screen takes you to our website where you will see banding criteria. The form requires settings to bullet point provision required to be funded through Element 3 over and above the first £6,000 from Element 2 or the notional SEN budget. It is important that provision is appropriate and evidence-based, supported by recommendations from a specialist either internally or externally. Provision must be different to what is already in place and be in response to the child or young person's needs. A setting must upload evidence to support the application and show the child or young person's high needs. Evidence can be external or internal reports, or assess, plan, do, review observations carried out within the last year. The most recent evidence is the most relevant, and it is essential that evidence supports provision. If no evidence is submitted, then moderators will not consider the application for that child or young person. Other information required is regarding funding a child or young person may be in receipt of from other teams, such as EAL or LAC. This is cross-referenced with other teams and ensures that settings are receiving their full entitlement for pupils and provision is not being double funded. The column for band amendments is for a child or young person who has previously been funded through Element 3, but circumstances have changed, meaning the need is greater, so further funding is required to meet those needs. Section C. The link takes you to the website where all Norfolk schools' SEN notional budgets can be accessed. The total amount received at the time of application equals the total SEN notional plus any additional Element 3 funding already received. Please note, SRB allocations are not to be included when applying for Element 3 funding. The next two screens show you how a setting's SEN budget is set and the amounts it comprises. As Element 3 funds are allocated throughout the financial year, so the SEN funding part of this will increase. This section is for the setting to show moderators what provision they have in place for all children and young people with SEND. From this information, moderators can determine the appropriateness of provision at the setting. DFE operational guidance suggests that provision does not necessarily mean a one-to-one TA, and advises settings to consider the needs of children and young people and how they can be met effectively and efficiently. Through the operational guidance document, the DFE gives recommendations on what should not be included as part of SEN costings. You will see that we have included good practice guidance and what should not be included within a provision map on this part of the form. As you fill in this section, the form will automatically deduct costings from the settings notional SEN budget amount entered earlier, so you can see how much is being spent on SEN provision. Settings do not have to complete this section if they already use their own version of provision mapping. They can simply upload the provision map as a separate document. Section D. This section provides moderators with further school context, which is important to triangulate with the child and young person's needs and whole school provision. The formulae will work out percentages. External agencies' information gives moderators a clear indication of what support the setting already accesses for their children and young people with SEND. Once the form is completed, it needs to be uploaded onto Perspective Lite with supporting evidence documentation and provision map if the setting has used their own. Our Element 3 Business Support Officer draws all the applications and evidence down from Perspective Lite and processes them. Our Business Support Officer carries out triage to ensure the correct form has been used, evidence has been submitted, and the notional budget total is correct. Our Business Support Officer may contact the setting if there are any queries to be rectified prior to moderation. Moderation normally takes 2 days. Moderators are made up of NCC reps from Children's Services, for instance, Virtual School Sensory Support, Virtual School Children in Care, ILMs, ATT and EPSS, and colleagues from a range of settings covering all phases through to post-16. Settings colleagues are head teachers, inclusion leads, SENCOs, assistant SENCOs. We encourage colleagues from settings to attend moderation as part of their CPD. Should you wish to take part, details of how to register your interest will be available at the end of this presentation. As it is the local authority's responsibility to ensure settings have sufficient funds to provide for the needs of the children and young people in their care, moderators will always allocate funds where evidence supports a child or young person's high needs. Therefore, this is the first area of the application that is scrutinised. Should evidence not support high needs, then funds will not be allocated. Should the evidence support high needs, but the moderators have questions over the provision map, then the setting will be contacted by a VS Send advisor, and this application will be remoderated later that term once the setting has provided the further information required. Remoderation is usually 1 day, and settings may be asked to attend to discuss provision or evidence with moderators. All moderation is facilitated by VS Send advisors. We do not make any funding decisions. However, we will provide extra supporting evidence if we have had involvement with the setting and children or young people. Moderators will provide feedback on the application and may refer to evidence submitted, provision, or notional spend. They will also comment on banding if they do not agree with the banding requested. Feedback will be positive as well as informative and is there to provide guidance for future applications and inform our processes. Should you need anything further from the VS Send team or be interested in taking part in funding moderation sessions, please feel free to contact us via the mailboxes shown here. We hope this video has been of benefit to you. Should you wish to provide us with any feedback on how we can improve services, please send us an email.